Meetings in Brussels get off to a bumpy start. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. President Trump accusing Germany of being totally controlled by Russia because of energy deals with Moscow. He's also calling out our allies over defense spending, saying many countries fall short, leaving American taxpayers with the tab.
The United States is paying far too much, and other countries are not paying enough. This has been going on for decades, and it's disproportionate and not fair to the taxpayers of the United States, and we're going to make it fair.
Joining me now is Damon Wilson. He's Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council. He is there in Brussels, so it's great to have you with us today. Damon, when the President's talking about the burden sharing, as NATO was set up, and as we've gone forward to trying to modernize NATO, how did that go over today? And also talk to me a little bit about the President's idea to increase the goal of spending by each country to 4% of their GDP.
Thanks, Dana. Yes, the president's been, you can say, unequivocal in his expectation that the allies would carry what he's called a fairer burden of defense. Came in with very clear messaging. And two things I think really unfolded here. One, the recognition that we've actually seen now a historic increase in burden sharing just in the past couple of years. Every ally as of this year is now increasing defense spending. We've gone from 3 to 8 that are now meeting that 2% mark of spending 2% of your GDP on defense. And the plans that the allies have submitted now show about $266 billion in new defense investment up until 2024. So against the backdrop of actually some real demonstrable progress on that burden sharing issue, the president laid a marker down. He upped the ante here in Brussels. And I think he surprised his colleagues by saying he raised his expectations to 4%. I think that took some of the allies by surprise. Is this hyperbole, sort of raising the ante so that we put pressure on the other allies getting to 2% faster? Perhaps it's a little bit of that, but it's been the issue front and center here in Brussels.
But as part of the issue of one of the reasons the president is encouraging countries to increase what they're spending on defense, and I know that 8 of the countries had met that 2% goal, partly because of the dangers and the threats that the NATO countries face together. Let me play for you sound from the NATO Secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, on allies working together, and then I'll have you react.
Despite the disagreements we see, for instance, on trade, or climate change, or the Iran nuclear deal, or we see the discussion on defense spending, the fact is that NATO has been able to deliver, to make decisions, and actually strengthen what we do together, all 29 allies, and also what we do together, Europe and North America.
I would love your thoughts on how much a threat Russia still is to many of the countries, but also what NATO is trying to do on counterterrorism.
You know, it's actually pretty remarkable, some of the decisions that have come together out of the summit, despite some of this rhetoric. Jens Stoltenberg is right. There have been big disagreements in the past. You think about the divisions in the alliance over Vietnam, Iraq, the Suez Canal crisis, the deployment of Pershing missiles. And he's pointing out that despite those disagreements, the alliance has gotten things done in the past. In that context, if you read the decisions, the declaration coming out of the leaders' meeting, it is unequivocal as allies saying that Russia poses a threat to the alliance. And moreover, the alliance really endorsed an initiative the U.S. put forward, a readiness initiative, if you will, that says by 2020, NATO will be able to deploy 30 combat vessels, 30 mechanized battalions, 30 air squadrons within 30 days. This is this readiness initiative to show to Russia or any adversary that the alliance is not obsolete, in the words of President Trump, but it's actually very relevant and has responded. There was complete agreement around that, and we've seen raising of the bar and of ambition of actually alliance unity to deter Russia.
The other thing that is of interest, I think, to people, and they might not even realize that it's happening, is that at this meeting, the allies agreed to expand NATO. Tell me about that.
So I think that's actually one of the really good news stories coming out of this summit, is that despite all odds, we've now seen an agreement between Skopje and Athens, the country of Macedonia and Greece, over the disputed name of this country. This is what blocked the country from entering the alliance at the Bucharest summit back in 2008. And so the Greeks and Macedonians have worked this out. There's an agreement that they'll now be the Republic of North Macedonia. And based on that agreement, the alliance leaders said today, we invite you to begin accession talks. It's pretty significant in the midst of all these transatlantic tensions, fight on burden sharing, to signal that NATO's open door, its enlargement process, remains viable. And to invite the government in Skopje to begin that process is quite significant.
Damon, just one last question for you. The president is now going to attend the dinner there in Brussels with the NATO partners. Is there anything less for them to discuss before he takes off for the UK?
Absolutely. So, I mean, one other thing that came out of the meeting today was what you mentioned, counterterrorism. The president wanted, and I think the alliance is showing through its decisions here, much more squarely focused on the issue of counterterrorism, both in its capabilities, but a lot of attention on the South, what they're going to do to support Tunisia, Libya, and a new mission in Iraq. So tonight at dinner, they're going to be talking about some of the more interesting issues: the Middle East, North Korea, and Russia. And this is really a chance, without all the diplomats and bureaucrats in the room, for the leaders to have a frank conversations at a strategic level. They'll want to hear from the president about what he's going to do with President Putin in Helsinki on Monday. They'll want to hear his personal debrief of the Singapore summit and his meeting with Kim Jong-un. So I think tonight, the decisions are over, but I think still the dinner tonight is among the most important conversations for the leaders themselves.
As it often is. All right, Damon Wilson, thank you. President Trump also taking aim at Germany's reliance on Russian energy.
We're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia, and I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas. Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia because they got rid of their coal plants, they got rid of their nuclear. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia.
Chris Starwald is Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report. He's also quite knowledgeable about this whole issue in regards to Germany and Russia and the pipeline. This has been going on for quite a while, and it's quite interesting to me to see that a former leader of Germany is actually at the center of all of this.
Yeah, Gerhard Schroeder is a big sellout. He has made life very difficult for Angela Merkel. And one of the ways that he has, one of the ways that the Russians have put Merkel in a pincer movement, is that they have used Schroeder, who is a Putin kisser-upper, to apply pressure through the political establishment in Berlin, but then also through the Greens, who have come out hard against nuclear energy. The increasing use of nuclear energy by the Germans was a response, in fact, to Cold War concerns about the Soviet Union and that dependency. So the move toward, to one point, I think they were approaching 50% of their power grid was run off of nuclear power. That was a response to not wanting to be dependent on the Soviets and then the Russians.
Right.
But between Schroeder's pressure and then the Greens' pressure, they said that nuclear was unacceptable, and they have now basically tripled the load that they're taking in natural gas from the former Soviet Union. And that puts Merkel in a very difficult position because both the left and the right are coming after her, and Putin is pushing through both sides.
So then when the president puts the onus on her to ask, what are you thinking, what are you doing, and how can we be expected to protect you if you're the ones who are going to be dependent on Russia? How much political pressure is she under at home?
Germany could break at any time. It is Merkel has been the cat with 9 lives. She has managed to sort of fend off the ethnic nationalists to the right narrowly. Her decision to accept all of those migrants has been catastrophic for her political chances. But at the same time, Germany has a robust left, a very robust left. She is a coalition governor. She is a centrist, and she has been having a very hard time keeping these two extremes at bay. The pressure on her that Trump is applying on her, especially now that she's got the the demand isn't just to get up to the 2%, but to double the contribution to 4% to NATO is unpopular with both the left and the right. That's a tough burden for her to bear. Merkel, who has done so much to keep Europe from falling to pieces, is under enormous pressure.
In fact, the president said that everyone in NATO should maybe look to a goal of spending 4% of their GDP on defense. The United States is at 3.5%, Greece at 2.2%, and Germany way down the line at 1.2% as I look at these. What do you think the reaction will be from members of Congress here back home to the president's suggestion that we spend more on defense?
Well, the suggestion is we might spend more on defense if these European states they get to their current commitment and then double up. And he says it's not in 10 years. It's you got to do it now. You got to start spending all that money. That is a political non-starter in most of these countries. That is because, again, on the right, they like the Russians. On the right in Germany and other countries, they like Russia. And on the left, they don't like military spending.
Right.
So how do you butter that bread on both sides? It gets pretty tough. In the Congress, what they're going to do about this is they're going to duck their heads down a little bit, and they're just going to hope that all this stuff goes past, and they can get back on to having a hearing where they're yelling at somebody. How
do you butter bread on both sides? It's a good question. I'll think about it later.
You got to hold it by the crust.
All right. All right, thank you. And be sure to check out our weekly podcast. It's called I'll Tell You What. Just go to foxnewspodcast.com. You scroll down, and then you see the logo. Click on that, and you'll see a wide variety of options for downloading. All right, we're getting our first look at the soccer team rescued from a cave and a live report from Thailand just ahead. Plus, Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh meeting with senators as both sides dig in for a tough confirmation battle. Florida Senator Marco Rubio will join me live later in the hour. But first, here's Senator Lindsey Graham.
The one line.
President Trump's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh again making the rounds on Capitol Hill as both parties look for ways to use the nomination to help them in November. Josh Kroshar of the National Journal writing today, Kavanaugh is the epitome of an establishment pick. That's a good thing for the Supreme Court, but would give red state Democrats an opening to run against elitism and more broadly align with the emerging Democratic midterm message that the Republican Party doesn't represent the interests of the average Joe on issues like health care. I'm joined now by Mo Alithi, former communications director for the DNC and a Fox News contributor, and Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union. Thanks for being here in person. Of course, I appreciate that. Take a look at this poll, Matt. Health care being a top issue. This is from the Kaiser Family Foundation poll. Democrats say 33%, independents 26%, Republicans 18%. And I know that every Supreme Court nomination in the battle ends up being about the politics of the day. So back when it was Roberts and Alito, there's a lot of conversation about the War Powers Act. When it was Kagan and Sotomayor, a lot about campaign finance. And now, is this really going to come down to health care?
No. And by the way, how insulting is it to read that somehow the Democrats are the party looking out for the average person? Did they not pay attention in the election of 2016? They lost so many of those voters because they're more focused on the elite opinions of the big cities, and they're not focused on their bread and butter, which used to be working class values. And so the idea that Brett Kavanaugh is going to be the poster child for people who don't represent American values, when simply all he wants to do is pretty simple. He wants to represent the words of the Constitution and interpret them appropriately. I think we're ready for a little bit of constitutional restoration.
And do you think the Democrats are a little bit, I said in the green room, that they're in a pickle, right? If you don't fight against the nominee, you are going to disappoint the base. But if you fight too much, you could hurt the chances of winning any of those swing states this year in the Senate.
Yeah, look, I think it's going to take something fairly extraordinary for this nomination not to go through. I think the numbers are just there for him. Having said that, there's a reason why there are hearings, and there's a reason why the Senate has a responsibility to vet the candidates for the Supreme Court. And so it is a good opportunity for Democrats, and frankly, a necessary opportunity for Democrats to focus on the issues that they want to push on. And they seem to be settling on Roe v. Wade, on pre-existing conditions and the Affordable Care Act, and then to some extent his role should an investigation into the president ever make its way to the Supreme Court. I love the fact that Democrats are focusing on the issue of pre-existing conditions as a campaign issue. Generally, I wish they had in 2010, because I think the Affordable Care Act might have, in terms of public opinion, been in a different place if Democrats had actually been running a little bit more aggressively on it. The fact that they are challenging on this issue right now may not be enough to stop this nomination from going through, but could provide them some more wind in their sails heading into this midterm.
The only problem with that is that Republicans are not opposed to having pre-existing conditions covered, right. And the idea that a Justice Kavanaugh would rule them being included in a health care plan is unconstitutional is absurd on its face.
Well, but a Justice Kavanaugh voting to overturn the Affordable Care Act, should that come to the Supreme Court, which it could.
It just feels like a real lead. Like, I mean, it's like there's so many shoulds and coulds. But I did want to point out to this because it might help Democrats turn out in the election, but it could help Republicans as well. Take a look at this list. Vice President Mike Pence, his campaign schedule in the next few days. He's going to Kansas City. I know you know that place very well. He will be campaigning for Kevin Yoder up there. He'll go to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and do a plant tuner with Representative Rod Blum. And then Friday he'll be in Chicago for Peter Roskam. How are you feeling right now about the House side of things for the Republicans?
Over the last 45, 50 days, the political terrain has gotten much more positive for Republicans. A Supreme Court opening is kind of like the queen mother desire for every Republican in the midterm. It's the issue that unites us more than any other issue. And Kevin Yoder, Rod Blum, Peter Roskam, these are the types of seats that if we hold these seats, the Democrats will not pick up the majority in the House.
The interesting thing about those seats is that they are seats that right now are feeling some economic pain because of the trade war that the president launched.
Are Democrats able to take advantage of that moment, though, and make some headway?
On the ground in these districts, Democrats are running aggressively against the president's trade war. And I think one of the reasons they're deploying Mike Pence, who is much more popular than the president right now in these battleground districts, is a sign that they are seeing that they have some concern.
Every one of these House members would have taken the president. Let's face it, we know this. Yeah. The vice president tends to get the call more often.
Yeah, the vice president, he's going to be on the road a lot because the president's also busy. All right, Mo Alithi and Matt Schlapp, thank you.
Thanks.
Republicans pushing for a quick confirmation for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. I'll talk to former Hillary Clinton campaign press secretary Brian Fallon on how the left is pushing back in his first appearance on the Daily Briefing. Soccer team now recovering from their ordeal in a hospital. An update on their condition live from Thailand. With automated or fake accounts, the move set to drop the total combined follower count on Twitter by about 6%, which is considered a substantial drop, but a good thing. Brand new images of the 12 young soccer players in Thailand as they, along with their coach, recover from a long, harrowing ordeal after the daring mission to rescue them wrapped up. Jeff Paul is live in Mae Sai, Thailand. Jeff.
Well, Dana, the boys and their coach are all in different stages of recovery right now, but judging by some of the video the government provided today, it appears that they are in really good spirits. In this video, you can see some of the boys smiling. In other shots, it looks like they're throwing up the victory or peace sign and putting their hands together to show gratitude. The main concern at this point is their nutrition and hydration. They've all lost weight. They also want to make sure they haven't contracted any soil, water, or animal-based illnesses. Doctors say so far they aren't showing any signs. We're also learning the parents of the boys are finally getting a chance to see their kids. For some, it's through glass. Others, it's in the room, but 2 meters away in sterilized suits. Now, earlier, the commander of the mission spoke, and while speaking, he wanted to credit the help from around the world for the successful mission. Take a listen.
ความสามัคคีนี้ไม่ใช่เฉพาะในจังหวัดเชียงราย
This unity is not only with Chiang Rai or Thailand, it's a global unity. This incident was more than a life-saving mission. It's gone beyond that. It's the unity of all nationalities.
Now, the commander also wanted to say that because of that international cooperation, this mission impossible became possible. He also wanted to take a moment to remember that retired Thai Navy SEAL member who died in the cave, lining it with oxygen tanks, calling him a true hero. Dana?
Indeed. And so what is next for the team, if you know?
Well, they'll spend about 7 to 10 days in the hospital, and then after that, they're going to get some care while they're at home. Doctors are going to make visits to their house just to make sure they're doing okay and that things haven't gotten any worse for about a month. But one other point that one of the officials wanted to make just to the world is that He said that these kids aren't bad, that, it was just an accident and that they didn't really have any control over it. And I thought that was a really interesting point. Dana?
All right, thank you so much. We'll keep an eye on that. And as the president's Supreme Court nominee makes the rounds on Capitol Hill, how will Democrats try to block his confirmation? I'll speak with the head of a group pledging $5 million in ads to oppose Brett Kavanaugh. Former Hillary Clinton campaign press secretary Brian Fallon. Democrats working to build their opposition to Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh in response to a tweet from Virginia Senator Tim Kaine asking whether Kavanaugh would respect previous rulings on Obamacare and civil rights. My next guest writes, "We already know the answers to these questions, Tim Kaine. Stop playing political games and help us. #Stop Kavanaugh." I'm joined now by Brian Fallon. He's executive director of Demand Justice and former press secretary to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and it's a pleasure to have you on today. If I could take you back to the campaign, do you wish that Hillary Clinton had focused more on the judicial issues and judges back on the campaign?
Well, we gave it a try. I think literally she devoted a few days' worth in a row of speeches to the Supreme Court. It just never really resonated, Dana. I think that the left for years has been complacent about the courts. We have a lot of catching up to do. Conservatives for the last 4 decades have organized around this. They've treated it as a voting issue. I think the reason for that is because groups like the Federalist Society sprang up in response to what they thought was a Warren Court era in the Supreme Court's history that didn't represent their values. They didn't like a lot of those decisions that were, for us, upholding progressive values. And so they built a whole infrastructure to get more of their types of people on the courts. And we on the left have been complacent in the face of that. I think that the decisions that came out of the end of this Supreme Court term, especially upholding the president's controversial travel ban, we're already starting to rouse people on the progressive side of things. But now I think people with this Supreme Court vacancy hanging in the balance, people are realizing it all the more. I just hope it's not going to happen too late. I hope that, and I think that the progressive grassroots is going to rise up and meet this moment.
So Mo Alithi, the former DNC communications chair, I don't know if you could hear him. He was on the previous segment, and he said that Republicans have the votes. He understands why the Democrats want to fight. I do want to show you this Washington Post op-ed it's a column by David Vondrelli, and he said about Chuck Schumer that a wise leader preserves options, including the option to fall back and fight another day on more favorable ground. Schumer's base pandering makes strategic retreat nearly impossible. If in a few weeks Kavanaugh's nomination is humming along, a leader with room to maneuver could give cover to those endangered Senate Democrats. Instead, Schumer has left them high and dry in hostile territory. So I guess I would ask you, is this effort in some ways biting off your nose to spite your face?
No, I don't think so. 2 points. Number one, this is a seat that will decide the direction of the court for the next 40 years. So this is no small thing. This is bigger than any one election cycle. So I think we shouldn't be nearsighted and only obsess about the effect on the November elections. While those are certainly important for Democrats and anyone that cares about upholding the Roe v. Wade decision, that cares about upholding pre-existing condition protections, all that stuff is on the line. I don't think we can afford to cede this fight, and I don't believe it's as out of reach as Mo may have made it sound. If Democrats can stay united, there's 49 votes on the Democratic side. If they can be united, and with the possibility of Senator McCain not being there to vote, it's just a matter literally of peeling off one Republican. And there are 2 members, as you know, Dana, of the Republican caucus that are pro-choice. And the Roe issue is going to be all important in this debate.
Those 2 senators, Collins and Murkowski, did vote for him to be confirmed to the Circuit Court back in 2006. But before I let you go, they're telling me I'm running out of time. I do want to ask you about something. The Democrats have been bringing up this issue of Brett Kavanaugh's paper trail going all the way back to his White House days when I certainly knew him there. Take a listen to what Senator Grassley said about that on Maria Bartiromo's show.
I'm being asked by people in your business, the journalists, how many documents they want. Can the Democrats get all the documents they want? Obviously, we're going to do what we've done in past Supreme Court nominations, but you sometimes wonder if they're going to vote no, what more do they need to know?
So I guess he's saying if the decisions have already been made by so many of the senators to vote no, then what more would you gain by having paper trail going back to the White House days as staff secretary when he's written 300 opinions as a justice?
Because there's a precedent here for how these Supreme Court nomination fights go. And the standard is that all the documents that are available get turned over. That's what happened with Elena Kagan when she was nominated by Barack Obama. She had worked in the Clinton White House, had, I think, 170,000 pages of emails that were turned over to the Senate Judiciary Committee. That was very work intensive. I think there was 6,000 lawyers spending, 6,000 hours spent by lawyers going through those documents. Brett Kavanaugh, by comparison, we just learned yesterday, there's 1 million documents sitting at the Bush Library from his time working with you in the Bush administration as the staff secretary, which is an important job.
Well, yeah, have you ever done, I'm sure you had to go through staffing process once in a while. A lot of those emails are probably about, could you change the Oxford comma back to not Oxford comma, but I get your point about wanting to see those documents, and I know that the Bush Center has said that they will cooperate with the request.
Right.
Let me ask you one last thing. The Demand Justice is your group, and perfectly legal, absolutely acceptable practice not to release names of donors. But given that, do you think that the Democrats might stop attacking right groups or conservative-leaning groups who do the same?
Look, I think that we would still prefer to see a world where Citizens United was not the law of the land and where we reformed our campaign finance system. But as long as we're living in this world, we on the left, as we were talking about at the top of this segment, have conceded this fight to conservatives for too long. You've had a group called the Judicial Crisis Network, which always swoops in whenever there's a big Supreme Court fight. They're spending $10 million, twice what we're going to be able to spend in this fight. So if we were going to just continue to sit on the sidelines, we'd have more of the same result, and that's the definition of insanity. So we're trying to rise to the challenge here and make investments that will help position our Democrats and potentially either Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski to oppose this nominee.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. We hope to have you back. Brian Fallon, thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Now for another point of view from a Kavanaugh supporter. Justin Walker is a former Supreme Court clerk for Justice Anthony Kennedy and a former law clerk for Judge Kavanaugh. Let me ask you about this idea that there's 1 million documents that they want to look through. I imagine that a lot of those are duplicates. I don't have that for sure, but just knowing how the process works, having been there, there's like the send and the receive, and then so maybe they'll be able to cut that down. Are you worried about the paper trail, so to speak, slowing down this nomination?
No, I'm really not, Dana. I think that as soon as people get to know Judge Kavanaugh, his paper record, his judicial record, who he is as a person, the kind of judge that he is, the way that he thinks, I think that they're going to find an independent thinker. They're going to find someone with impeccable credentials. And I think open-minded people are going to find somebody that they're happy to support.
A lot of Democrats this morning, I listened to some podcasts saying that they're concerned about how Judge Kavanaugh would then ultimately rule on a question about President Trump and whether he could be impeached or indicted or brought up for trial. And here's what the Minnesota Law Review on separation of powers said, that the indictment and trial of a sitting president, moreover, would cripple the federal government, rendering it unable to function with credibility in either the international or domestic arenas. Such an outcome would ill serve the public interest, especially in times of financial or national security crisis. I do think it's interesting, Justin, that had Hillary Clinton won, and if she would have been able to make a nomination to the Supreme Court, I imagine that many people would have pointed back to Judge Kavanaugh's article here and said, oh, see, this shows that Hillary Clinton should not have to do X or Y. Your thoughts about how this is being convoluted in the conversation?
Absolutely. I mean, the first way that it's being convoluted is that people forget that when that article was published in 2009, Barack Obama was president. So to the extent we learn much about how Judge Kavanaugh would think about partisan questions, we see that he does not allow the party of the president to affect how he would think about legal issues. That's point number one. Point number two, I think, maybe even more important. His law review article was about a legislative suggestion that he was making to Congress. It was not an interpretation of the law. Now, of course, there are activist judges out there, and they don't distinguish between what should be done and what can be done. But Judge Kavanaugh's article was very clear. He was not saying that the president cannot be investigated. He was saying that Congress might want to consider adjusting the timeline for those investigations. But that's a question for Congress. He wasn't saying how he would decide as a judge.
I want to get your reaction to this. Ken Starr, who Kavanaugh worked for way back when, wrote this today in a Washington Post op-ed. Kavanaugh is not quick to overturn judgments reached through the legislative process, no matter how untidy. His pro-democracy, let the people govern themselves vision has been evident in his incisive questioning of the modern-day judicial emphasis on courthouse deference to administrative agencies. I'll give you the last word in regards to his former boss writing that about him today.
I think that, Judge Starr is correct that Judge Kavanaugh has not been quick to challenge Democratic legislative enactments, and he's also not been quick to challenge judicial precedents. In fact, he wrote a 1,000-page treatise on the law of judicial precedents with 12 other distinguished judges that said only under extraordinary circumstances should we overturn a precedent, because precedent encourages stability and predictability and reinforces the rule of law. I think that when some open-minded, moderate people learn that about Judge Kavanaugh, they're gonna feel like this is someone they really should support.
All right, Justin Walker, thanks for being here today.
Thanks a lot, Dana.
Supreme Court nominee. The Trump administration wants to put new tariffs on thousands of Chinese products. Things on the list include cigarettes, food products, and steel. Let's talk about how this impacts us here at home with Christina Partsinevelos right here.
Yeah, you just listed consumer products, and that's the big difference from previous tariffs that have been imposed by the United States. Right now, this is coming from the Wall Street Journal. They reported it this morning. They're saying that the United States wants to impose 10% tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. So think of everything in your house. I know some people say they like to buy American, but a lot of the products that you don't even know, like Restoration Hardware, that's a publicly traded furniture company, they bring in a lot of Chinese furniture or products that are used in their stores, and so we could see prices start to climb higher. Like you listed, cigarettes are on that list. Fish sticks, as an example.
But do we get a lot of cigarettes from China?
I didn't know this. But
I didn't either.
I don't smoke.
That seems wrong. Americans who are still smoking.
But it could be a very cheap alternative. I don't know. I'm not a smoker. And so this is what's creating a lot of, market reaction today. Not as much as you would think, though. Over the last little while, the S&P 500 has only been down 5% because of all this, or up, 5% due to this tariff talk.
Right.
So investors right now think that it's not going to be that bad.
Because we have a little bit of a margin there. And then tell me about the Pfizer and prescription drug prices and the president.
So Pfizer has agreed today that they are going to roll back some recent price increases and not increase the price of their drugs going forward. Why? Because the president spoke to Pfizer yesterday on the phone for about 10 to 15 minutes, because the president has lobbied for quite some time that the pharmaceutical industry charges way too much. On average, Americans spend $1,162 per person per year just on prescription drugs. 1 in 4 can't even afford to fulfill their prescription. So it's clearly an issue, a political one, and that's the reason why they're trying to fight pharma companies. Pharma companies, though, say we spend so much on R&D